Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we discuss research-backed strategies and techniques with recognized thought leaders that will deliver results that matter and create lasting change for leaders at all levels. Well, welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Scott Osman and Jacquelyn Lane. Scott is the CEO of the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaching Agencies, a company that services and opportunities that amplifies the collective impact of its members. He has lots of years of experience in preparing, developing, and energizing inspired leaders for the future. And he's a certified coach and been with Marshall for many years as well. He's also the co-author of the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Becoming Coachable, Unleashing the Power of Executive Coaching to Transform Your Leadership in Life. And today I'm also joined by his co-author, the president of the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaching Agency, Jacquelyn Lane, who is a firm believer that healthy businesses are the ones that are the most powerful forces for good. At the 100 Coaches, she mentioned, said she wants to make the world a better place, one leader at a time. Thank you both for joining me today on the podcast.
So great to be here with you, Charles.
Yeah, such a pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Yep. I love for the first question I always ask to just give our listeners more insight into you, provide us a little more background on both of you and your role, and what is really the Marshall Goldsmith Coaching Agency?
Such a great question, and an answer we'd love to give. So the 100 Coaches Agency actually is an outgrowth of the 100 Coaches community, which was based on Marshall's insight that his great mentors, Peter Drucker, Francis Hesselbein, had been super generous with him, and he wanted to pay it forward. And so he decided he was going to teach 15 people everything he knew about coaching. I knew Marshall, and he asked me to help him do that. And one thing led to another, and all of a sudden now we're a community of about 400 people who Marshall has paid it forward. And it's a no guilt, no obligation, no money community. The only thing he asks is that when you have an opportunity, you pay it forward also. And then as an outgrowth of that, people started calling us up looking for coaches because we had aggregated some of the best coaches in the world. And then I met Jacquelyn, and we formed the 100 Coaches Agency to make that process really an elegant process, the curation process we call it. We'll talk more about it, I'm sure.
Wonderful. Well, let's get into this great book because there's so much about coaching out there in the market. And when I look at coaching books, when I read them, I just see this is kind of the same approach. But I was so delighted and surprised that this talks about the other side of the coaching equation, what it means to be coachable. So how do you define coachability?
Yeah, so we found an interesting piece of information over the last few years of placing leaders and coaches together. It's that the most successful coaching engagements, we were looking for correlations. Was it the quality of the coach? Was it a certain level of leader? We found one thing, and that's came down to the word coachability, right? The leaders who are the most coachable end up going the furthest. They have the best coaching engagements, but not only that, they also tend to be some of the best leaders. In fact, we're talking to a number of our friends in the industry, and that's a term that's coming up more and more as people are hiring executives for different roles. The question they're asking these days is this person coachable?
It really also comes from an insight that Marshall had. I think Alan Mulally may have given it to him, is if you want to have a great outcome, start with great inputs. And being coachable, of course, is the greatest input you can have in an executive. And so this book was really a distillation of the insights from our community, starting with Marshall, in what it takes for someone to become coachable. And we ended up with what we call the openness framework, which are the 4 key pillars to become coachable and therefore get the most out of coaching.
Right.
And we're going to go into each one of those because those are some great frameworks, not only just to be more coachable, but for great leaders as well. You also talk about the misconceptions of coaching, and we can't go through all of them, but I'd like to highlight a few because I see this in leaders that I talk to with our member organizations as well. And I think Marshall's really dispelled the myth around a coach is something you should be ashamed of, right? That if you have a coach, it's a privilege, it's an honor. Don't have too much hubris regarding that, but it's not something you should be ashamed of. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. But the insight that I like to unpack a little further is the coach is there to fix you. And you say coaching is more like physical therapy rather than surgery.
Yep.
That's exactly right.
The metaphor that it's funny. The metaphor that people use so often in coaching is, of course, the sports metaphor, where you have an athlete and typically a great athlete who gets a coach. And you'd never imagine a top athlete without a coach. And those coaches are not there to fix a problem. Or actually, I guess in some cases, sure, maybe you're a tennis player and your swing's not where it should be, but you don't think of yourself, the tennis player, as being broken. You think of yourself, the tennis player, as wanting to excel even greater. And that I think is the big shift that's happening in coaching. And you're right, Marshall really led this, where coaching is an investment that you make in your most valued leaders to get the most out of them, because that's really where you're going to get the greatest growth and return on your investment.
I think it's also really the recognition that none of us do this alone, right? There's this myth of the leader as this, lone rider, uh, out, taking on the, conquering a new world or overcoming a challenge. But
Mm,
really, that's not the world of leadership that we live in anymore. We are in community with people. By necessity, have to work with other people and collaborate with them. Why wouldn't that apply to our leadership as well? And there's so much more that we can learn and do in partnership with other people.
Absolutely. And getting back to that metaphor, I love what you say in the book is that during those sessions you work together to improve things like strength and range of motion. And then you go home and do the exercises yourselves like a physical therapist. It's not like a surgeon where they're going to remove something and you're fixed, which I think is an important distinction to make when people go into these coaching relationships.
yeah.
So true. So true.
The other thing that I wanted to highlight too, and I had Ruth Gottian on the program and with mentoring, because I get a lot of this confusion around, should I get a mentor? Should I get a coach? Do I need both? What's the difference between those two?
Yeah, and we love Ruth.
Yeah.
And Ruth is both a coach and a mentor, but of course those hats are slightly different. A mentor is usually someone who's giving you advice based upon their own lived experience, whereas a coach is someone who is taking their experience and knowledge from all these different perspectives and experiences. They're usually in a paid capacity as well, so they're professionals at what they do, whereas mentors generally are not. And so again, that's an important distinction where a coach has, in some ways, a bigger toolkit,
Mm.
and they have the time to really be available for you as needed. Whereas a mentor is someone you should probably expect to be meeting with on a less frequent basis.
Yeah. I think also sometimes people confuse the individual and the role. The role of a mentor is really, I think, there to support your growth, to help you understand areas of improvement, or help sort of open the path up for you. A coach can do some things that mentors really can't do. So, for example, a coach will typically do a 360 to help understand your areas of weakness by surveying the people around you. And a coach is great at finding blind spots. And then I think perhaps for me the most important thing is the mentor relationship is often a slightly nuanced relationship where the mentor is also, there's some back and forth in the relationship and there's a little bit of emotion and other things involved in it. Whereas the coaching relationship, the coach is committed to your success alone.
Hmm.
The coach, a great coach, will have no ego involved in it, and they'll just be looking out for you. And that is a very, very unique relationship.
Right.
Oh, that's a great distinction there as well. And looking at that mentoring relationship, I find a lot of those are voluntary based on goodwill and mutual respect. And you want a mentor that has kind of the same life experiences that you want to achieve, right? And you both identified it very clearly, those that distinction between the two. The other one that I wanted to go through is that a coach needs to have walked in your shoes. They need to have the same experiences that you have in order to help you.
Oh,
Yeah.
we hear it a lot.
Well, at the 100 Coaches Agency, we always recommend three people. And we do hear that a lot. And because we have the luxury of recommending three people, we'll often recommend one person who's walked in the shoes, and another person who has a lot of experience in the sector, and another person who may just, in our opinion, be a great coach for completely different reasons. Um, I don't know that we have seen meaningful correlation between the success of a coach who's walked in the shoes versus the other coaches. We've anecdotally heard that when the coach has walked in your shoes and they're your coach, what you're going to get is someone who is going to tell you how they did it in a completely different circumstance than yours. Because the reality is, even if they had the same role that you had, it was a different company, possibly a different sector, and certainly a different time. And so, what it took for them to be successful may be different than what it's going to take for you to be successful. And a coach with a lot of experience coaching people in that role may actually have more diversity and a lot more to bring.
Right. And if we go back to the sports metaphor as an
Mm,
example, just because there's someone who's a fantastic golfer, let's say, they've got a great golf swing, that
mhm,
does not necessarily make them the best coach for you to improve your swing,
mhm.
right? Sometimes people who are good at doing a skill are not the best at teaching that skill or transferring that skill. In fact, the coaching skill set is a very specialized and
Right.
nuanced skill.
Having said that, many of our coaches are experienced executives who have become amazing coaches. So we're not saying that being an executive makes you not a good coach. I think what we're saying is it's not the only criteria that you should use, and it's certainly not a criteria that you should say like because this person was in my shoes, they will be a good coach.
Oh, that's important. And the curse of expertise, right? Where experts really don't make the best teachers in most cases because they don't know, they can't remember what it was like when they didn't know something. And a lot of the coaching skills, identifying weak spots, changing behaviors, reimagining goals, carries a little overlap to specific industry prerequisites. So I agree with you. It's not a high correlation, but what you alluded to was, the two most common types of coaches are either psychologists or social scientists that love to study human behavior to help people change, or former executives, correct?
Yep,
Yeah, those would be the two
absolutely.
most common for sure.
Although I would say, I feel like you're almost leading to this. Some of our best coaches are just coaches with a decade or more of experience. And after you've had a decade or more of experience coaching, where you came into coaching is much less relevant.
Absolutely. And I find too that with coaching, like it is kind of with financial advising, or even maybe with your healthcare and a doctor, people don't realize the power they have to make sure that they choose the right one or to get a second opinion. So I love your approach, which you kind of mentioned briefly before, on when someone comes to you and wants to be coached by someone, they just don't assume you're going to have all the answers and you're going to put them with the right person initially. You go through kind of a three-step process that perhaps you could elaborate on that gives more insight in the coaching process and really identifies them with the correct person.
Absolutely. We love our curation process and have been developing this over the last several years. In fact, I want a curation process for every professional service in my life. I want someone to curate the best doctor for me, the best lawyer, the best hair salon. I love this idea because it's all about understanding what someone really needs and then pairing them with the right resource for them and giving them the several choices so that they can be informed in making that decision. So our process starts with an introductory call where we get to know a leader, hear about their situation, and we're just listening. We're not trying to tell them any solution. We're not trying to push them any certain way. We are just here to listen. And I think that creating that space and that openness is a really beautiful space for people to
Mm.
just expand into. Um, and then from there, we have a conversation about what we think could be the right fit for them based upon their unique circumstance. We always try to. I mean, it's such a fun process brainstorming. And having the both of us on a call,
Mhm.
we hear different things and pick up on different things, and so it's really fun to do that in partnership as well. So then we'll create a short list of who we think could be some good resources or solutions for them. We always make sure that they have interest and availability in the engagement before we recommend anything to the client. Then we create a proposal and have a second call with the leader where we just talk them through each of the three people that we're recommending. And like Scott mentioned earlier, we try to spread the field a little bit. We think all three of them could be an excellent choice, but they're going to be different. We're not trying to give you slightly different flavors. We're trying to show you three very different flavors. And I think that's a really fun process. But each of them really resonate with a client in a very specific way.
We do this for our clients, and as you know, we're working at the really the very highest end of the field. But I think that anybody who's getting coaching should apply a similar process for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, we always say even at the most expensive coach, and they are expensive. The most expensive part of coaching is always the time that you commit to coaching. And so,
Correct.
if you're going to make that investment in coaching, I think it's worth making the investment up front to make sure you get the right coach.
Right.
So, starting with your own discovery process of really understanding what you're looking for initially, even if it's not perfect, writing down, this is why I want to coach, and this is what I'm hoping to get out of coaching. And this is the part that I think would be the hardest. Try to find 6 different coaches that you think could be a good coach for you.
Right.
And we get it. Like, it's really hard to find coaches. It's not a simple process. Part of why we exist. Um, but the reason I say six is because you want to have enough to be able to deselect three, so that you have the three best of your set, and then have calls with each of those three based on your preset, sort of your own sort of self discovery process.
Hmm.
And then I think your chances of finding the right coach for you are very high.
Right.
So that's a great approach, and I would advocate for that for everyone. I, with all the digital coaching platforms coming out, with so many being certified in some form of coaching, that democratization of coaching has become where it's just there's so much noise in the market. There's so many people. Who do you choose? But I love your selection process, your vetting process, and curating it and identifying that even if you're not using your agency, at least have some options so you can self-select against a few and not go with the first person.
Yeah, actually, Charles, let me just add one more thing, and that is, so we're professionals, right? We know all the coaches in our network. We know them very, very well, and we invest the time to get to know the person who's looking for a coach. We listen to them, and then we pair them up. And even we don't know, among the three people we're recommending, who is going to be the right chemistry fit.
Right.
Right? We know they're all going to be great, and we know there's no bad selection, but the chemistry part of it is a little bit of magic. And that's why it's so important to at least interview three people, so that you can have some sense of what coaching should feel like.
Yeah. It's amazing how all three of the calls are enlightening. Again,
Hmm.
there may be a laundry list of things that a leader wants to work on, but in the process of meeting three different people and hearing about their styles and approaches, there's often that deep chemistry that happens with one, or it becomes very clear that there's a certain number one priority that executive has, and one coach in particular is really the best at that. So,
Hmm.
it's amazing how revealing the entire process is.
Yeah.
Again, I want to do this for
We want it for
everything in
everything.
my life.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, having such a prolific list of coaches with all of your experience and expertise to bring to the table, that's really what makes your coaching agency so unique and so sought after. And I'm going to depart a little bit from coaching, but this will help leaders be more coachable as well, because I love the insight that you put in the book that I've learned many things from Marshall, from reading his books, talking to him. But the three lessons that you put in that Peter Drucker taught Marshall that I think are worth repeating during this interview for the leaders on the call. And that first lesson that he learned was we are here on earth to make a positive difference, not to prove how smart or right we are. I wish that could resonate with every leader that's listening and beyond that, because it's such a profound statement. And the world would be such a better place, right, if more leaders adopted this mindset.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, and we are really fortunate to spend a lot of time with Marshall, and some of the time we're spending individually with him, and sometimes we're in a group. And hearing Marshall tell these stories over and over again about incredibly smart people who still feel the need to prove that they're smart. And the big insight is, like, you don't need to. Like, you are smart. Everybody recognizes it. And more importantly, your need to prove that you're smart takes air out of the room
Right.
and doesn't allow the space for other people to bring not just their genius, because that's good, maybe not, but diversity of ideas.
Mm,
And the smartest, I think we all believe that fundamentally the smartest person in the world is not as smart as a great group of people.
right. It's so true. And this is the number one challenge we see
Hmm.
all the time in people engaging in the coaching process is that they think they have all the answers. It's Marshall's
Right.
classic if this is what
Yeah.
got me here, then it must be working for me.
Yeah.
They don't realize that what got them here won't necessarily get them there.
The other great lesson, which I love, and I've used this one, is every decision in the world is made by the person who has the power to make the decision. Make peace with that. I see that struggle happen so often in companies that they gripe, they complain, they resist. Deal with the reality. This is the person in that position that's able to make that decision and adapt and overcome.
Right. It's a
Hmm.
funny thing how many leaders struggle with that. The owner of the company gets to make the decision about what happens with the company, like it or not.
Well, and I think also the realization the person who makes the decision, uh, changes your relationship with that process. Like, all of a sudden, you become the salesman, and you recognize if you want to change the decision, you need to influence the decision maker. And I think that puts you in right relationship both with yourself and what you're supposed to be doing and the decision maker, and also allows you, if the decision maker finally puts their foot down and says, this is it, to move on.
Well, that's exactly the third lesson, which is it's
Yeah.
not the buyer's job to buy, it's the seller's job to sell.
So true. So true.
Well, good. Well, let's move into some of these characteristics now that really make someone more coachable. And the first one is that open to change, right? You need to begin the coaching process being more open to change. And opening to change doesn't mean that I just want to get promoted.
Well, I'll take this one since this was my challenge. Is, you read the books, I wasn't always coachable, and my big insight, I also thought that I didn't think I had to have all the answers. I just thought I did have all the answers, and on some level you do, because things need an answer and you have one. And then one day, Jacquelyn said, you don't have to have all the answers, and when you do, it stops other people from you know, giving their answers. And for whatever reason, that time she said it, it really struck with me. And I found a coach, and I realized that in order to be the kind of leader that I wanted to be, I needed to change. And before that, I was like, I think I'm doing pretty well. Like I'm sure there'll be some things I'll change on the margin, but really being committed, fundamentally committed to change, real change, has got to be the first thing, or else don't bother getting coached.
And it doesn't mean other people change. It means
No, no,
you have
right.
to be
Sorry.
willing to change. Yeah.
We could almost have written like, open to change in yourself.
And there's three resistors that you identify, which I think are great. Hubris, arrogance, and negativity that are resistors to change. And you identify hubris as being the number one.
Yeah. We love one of our favorite things that I guess we hear Marshall say, but we love to say all the time is, we'll ask somebody you're thinking about who's looking for a coach, what do you want to change? And they'll say, I'm pretty good. And Marshall will very quickly would then say, so work on hubris.
Work on
If you think
humility.
if you think you're perfect, work on humility.
That's the first one.
Yeah. I think we've identified it. But yeah, I mean, being, again, and I think there's a change in leadership, in the world of leadership today, that has to do with changes in the world and changes in generations, where leaders have to be more humble. They have to create more space for other people. They have to recognize that they don't have the answers. And in doing that, they create the potential for a lot of expansion. Um, but it is still counterintuitive to our image that we have of leaders, the Attila, starting with the Attila Hun image, but all the way up through, 80s, 90s, 2000s of leaders being, that ultimate alpha decision maker. That's not where great leadership is anymore.
What I love the quote that you put from Dean Miles regarding this, that coaching takes you from here to there. And we spend a whole lot of time about thinking about how great it's going to be to get there. But we don't spend it near enough time of where is here. And the strongest indicator of being open to change is not just your willingness to become more self-aware, but actually having a hunger for it.
So true. And
Yeah.
I love Nilofer Merchant has some writing and thinking on this topic as well. She uses the
Mhm.
example of orienteering or navigation, right? You have, like, if you got dropped in the woods somewhere, how do you know where you are? How do you know where you want to go? And then you can start to chart the course to get there.
That's right. So embracing change, it's resisting the resistance. Don't be resisting to it. Adopt a growth mindset. Find a healthy doubting balance, and really know that it's never too late, because I hear this a lot from more senior leaders that it's just too late for me. I'm just who I am. I can't change anymore. And you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and they can change if they're committed to doing it, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Right.
We see people change at any point in their life. It's just the willingness to change is the only necessary criteria to actually creating change.
Right. Yeah, and it's somewhat of a positive flywheel effect where we find that people who are genuinely open to change
Mm.
and take that first step really then start on that process of becoming open to feedback and then open to taking action and then open to being held accountable, and the virtuous cycle really continues.
Yeah.
And once we get through all four, we'll go through that virtual cycle briefly, just to remind everyone. Let's get into that feedback, because this is an area that I see a lot of leaders always struggle with. We always have training around this. I always hear from them, giving feedback better, getting and receiving feedback. And what you say in the coaching industry is that awareness activates agency, that if you receive the feedback, your perspective shifts and allows you to have a new path forward. And one of the most critical parts of feedback is it allows you to see your blind spots. So, talk to me a little bit about blind spots and kind of how they arise.
Yeah, here's an easy example. If we think of someone we're close to, a spouse, someone that we work closely with, most of us probably can quickly identify an area where they are self-sabotaging, right? Maybe they do something that's kind of getting in the way of their own success, their own happiness, maybe their organization's success, and it's very quick and easy to pick those out in some of the people that we're closest to. But that's about how easily it is for them to see our blind spots as well. But it's actually very difficult for us to become aware of our blind spots unless someone gives
Well,
us
I guess
that feedback.
technically, if we were aware of them, they wouldn't even
They
be
wouldn't be
blind
blind
spots.
spots by
Um,
definition.
but we do all have them, particularly for a leader, it's so difficult because people aren't always willing to tell you your blind spots because
Right.
the relationship between a leader and the subordinates, even peers, is such that it's hard to get that very clear feedback. And again, that's where the coach and the coaching process comes in. Is the
Mm,
coach, good coach has a way of telling you the unvarnished truth in a way that allows you to hear it and hopefully not get too offended. And then, like you said, begin working on change.
right. And Marshall's innovation of the 360 process
Hmm.
was also really great for that because it allows you, a coach, to collect information in a totally anonymous way and present that back to the leader, so that people who might otherwise be afraid to give feedback become a lot more willing to do so.
What I love that process, that stakeholder coaching process, and really getting feedback and what he recommends that you do when receiving feedback, which I think is hard for a lot of people because the most common things I hear from people giving it, let's just start with positive feedback. They either deflect it to say, oh, no, no, that's not me. It's you're better than me, or, you deserve the credit or whatnot. They don't receive it as a gift like they should, or they just try to thereby minimizing it, right? Or they do something to that really doesn't serve the better purpose, but the best response is just to say thank you, right?
That's correct.
Absolutely. It feels a little awkward at first because when someone gives you positive feedback, you feel like you want to say thank you or even thank you very much or I really appreciate that. But as soon as you start grading the feedback, then when someone gives you negative feedback, they feel like they've displeased you. And so they're not going to do that. And you're right. Just thank you is the only really right response to any feedback so that you can completely keep it neutral.
Well, even with the negative feedback too, you don't have to promise that you're going to do what they suggest, which I think is an important distinction to make. Tell your stakeholders that you promise to listen to all their ideas and do the best you can, because hopefully then that will avoid disappointment.
Right,
Right.
absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. I think it's such an important step. And I mean, think we all struggle with this.
Hmm.
But if we really truly see feedback as the gift that it is, then thank you is really the best and only appropriate response. Uh,
Yeah, you've gotten a lot better.
Thank you. See?
The other common blind spot that I see that I don't know if it's common or not, but I see this a lot with founders and with senior executives where they're passionate about the business. They love what they do. They will work until the job gets done, but they don't understand why their subordinates, their employees, don't have that same level of passion and commitment that they do.
I think it's a major hurdle that entrepreneurs and founders have to overcome to be successful because I mean they can't sustain that level of commitment over the long term and it's not healthy for the business, right? The business, and certainly in the early days, sure, work as hard as you can to get the business off the ground and successful, but then when you get to that inflection point where the business has to grow and bring in people with a little bit more experience, maybe slightly less passion than you have, um, to be able to create a more stable business, that's where a great coach can really be helpful.
So, in dealing with feedback, identify your blind spots, welcome the feedback, saying thank you, separate good and bad feedback, saying that you're not going to implement everything, but you're going to take it under consideration. And then the final piece I love, and perhaps we can unpack a little bit more, is embrace, which we kind of touched upon, but embrace intellectual humility. Because the primary quality, which I agree with you and Marshall on, is of successful leadership is intellectual humility. You can be wrong. Admit when you're wrong. You don't have all the answers.
Yeah. Not only can you be wrong, I know you're going to want to chime in on this, but what I've noticed, remember, my problem was, right, open to change, thinking I had all the ideas. Even when you think you have the best idea, it's often better to keep it to yourself and let other people's ideas come into play. Number one, because you want to hear those other ideas. And if you share your best idea first, then guess what? That idea became the only idea. And also, other people should feel celebrated for their ideas. And, we don't really know which is the best idea until it gets out into the wild and starts to produce. And so, having that intellectual humility to recognize that you don't always have the best idea, is just critical to having a successful company, but more importantly, to being a successful leader.
Well, and I think especially as we have intergenerational differences,
Hmm.
the younger generations, millennials and Gen Zs, really want to have their ideas heard. They want to have agency at work. They want to have meaningful work. And those leaders who are human, who have uh, empathy, who can hear the people around them, who can admit when they're wrong, that's really powerful for creating the environment we want to have. And I think that's going to really separate companies that are successful in attracting the next generation.
That is so good and so true. Let's move to the next characteristic of being coachable, and that's open to taking action, because coaching is all about taking action on something. And I love how Carol Kaufman describes it, and you have her in the book as well, is when a coach comes and says, okay, are you committed to doing this? Give me a scale of 1 to 10. And she says anything less than an 8, it's not going to happen. It's just going to get crowded out by all the other million things that they have to do. But once she gets into that 9 and 10 category, then the next question is, how confident are you in actually doing this? Which really prods the coach or the coachee to really have, that sense of commitment, right, around the coaching action that's going to be taken.
Right. I think it's a great example of both taking action and being held accountable by your coach.
It's true. So, we went through, you're open to change. It's great. You get feedback. So, the change that you need to make that you're hearing from your surround. But if you're not willing to take action and do something about it, again, like coaching is not going to help you, right? Because at the end of the day, coaching's always about like making that material change to yourself, to the business, to the people around you, to see the kind of growth that you're investing in with coaching. And Carol's just got a great methodology for holding people's feet to the fire and making sure that they do take that action.
What a lot of coaching, though, also helps you take that action, right? I mean, the coach will role play with you, will do contingency planning, but even with all that being said, sometimes it's not enough. And I love what you put in. It's in the heat of the moment, in these heated conversations, it also requires some emotional courage on the part of the individual to actually put this into practice.
Absolutely, it does. It's hard work. There's no denying it. If leadership was easy, more people would do it.
Yeah, and action also necessarily, I think, involves moving in different directions, and leaning into something, making decisions, which of course that's what leadership is all about. But every time we make these changes, there's a little bit of risk involved, personal risk, and probably reputational or even ego risk. But again, that's the essence of being a great leader.
Absolutely. And it's all about putting in the reps, getting the practice in. So you feel like we say here at IMS, being more comfortable, confident, and committed to doing it as a result, because you can know what to do, but it's not necessarily translating into doing it. And when you talk about action, look for intrinsic drivers of motivation. I think that's critical, not the extrinsic, because that's not going to hold people's motivation or their mindset enough to really want to go through and do the change. Plan before you act, develop that detailed action plan, and rehearse, which the coach is there to help you to do before you end up acting on that piece of advice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all great things. I think those are some ways in which, of course, a coach is a really helpful guide. And going back to our previous conversation around what's the difference between a coach and a mentor. right? A coach really understands how to get the most from you. Like what drives you? What's that fuel inside of you? And that's where I think you start to see some of the
Yeah.
nuance of the coaching skill set.
It's also a fun moment in coaching where you're actually feeling the acceleration and the impact of coaching in the actions that you're taking. And there's always room for growth. There's nobody. Well, I mean, we're frequently, maybe always, coaching people at moments of inflection. So they're looking for some kind of growth or some kind of change. And when they get to that action phase, then there you really start to see that happen.
Right. Back to our example of orienteering.
Hmm.
This is now you know where you are, you know where you're going, and you're starting to now walk that course. And
So
there are
you're almost all
pitfalls
the
along
way.
the way.
You're almost all the way there.
Yeah.
But now you have that change, but you want it to be lasting change. And that's where accountability comes in. So to have that lasting change that matters. And accountability has gotten a lot of press recently. I mean, in recent years, I see this a lot coming up with leaders. They want an accountability partner. Marshall has a great process with the 20 questions. But speak first to me about the difference between feedback and accountability, because sometimes those can be confusing.
Well, feedback is really about understanding what are those things that you maybe ought to change or become aware of. And accountability is after you've made a decision, usually based upon that feedback. How are you holding yourself to making some of those changes? And so, in a way, feedback is even less of an affront than accountability, because in accountability, like in feedback, you can say, well, maybe they have an uninformed perspective, right? Maybe they don't really understand what's going on. And you can still, internally dismiss that feedback if you wanted to. But with accountability, if you've committed to going to the gym 3 times a week, the only person you can blame for not going to the gym is you, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what makes it
I
even
mean, and one
trickier.
of the big insights. So I, we're not that boring, but we do talk about things like this all the time. um, because they're just fascinating to us. And we talked with Marshall about this, and he came to this realization that even though you have an accountability partner and you're being held accountable by a coach for a year, he says once that accountability stops, there's decay.
Right.
Like you just don't have that lasting change. It's not lasting change. Only accountability keeps the change that you have created, all that work that you put in,
Hmm.
keeps it ongoing. And so even after the coaching process has ended, and you've moved on, you and your coach have had a great coaching experience. Maybe it's gone a year, maybe longer. Finding an accountability partner, or at the very least, an accountability system to remind yourself probably every day that these are the goals and objectives that you have, and you want to make sure that when you slip, because you will, you recognize that you've slipped a little bit, and therefore you can do better the next day.
Right. I think those are really important distinctions. First, to say, of course, that you can do better the next day. That it's not about, it's not seeing it as failure. I think that's what part of our
Right.
problem with both feedback and accountability is we're quick to hear anything negative as being a failure.
Mm.
It's not a failure. It's just to say, I'm off course a little bit, but I can get back on course.
Yeah, the 20 question process, Marshall's book, great book, triggers. And I started doing, I guess 3 years ago now, I started doing the daily questions. And the biggest liberating insight for me of the daily questions is I get a new set every day. So even one of my favorite daily questions is, it's always, did I try my best, right? Did I try my best not to eat dessert? Because that was a change I wanted to make. And, originally I was eating dessert every day. I happened to have a sweet tooth. And then I started asking the daily question. And over not too long a period of time, I began to not eat dessert because I didn't like giving myself ones every day. And then over the course of a year, I realized, 60 times I had dessert. And you could look at that and say, well, you failed 60 times. But the reality was 300 times I didn't.
Right.
And that was just a major success. And that's true of everything. It's true if you're working on anger management, you could say, did I try my best not to shout today? And then if you have a bad day, that's okay. Record the day and move on to the next day and do better.
And I still like the distinction of did I try my best? Because you still may have shouted or had dessert. But if you really tried, effort does matter. It's not just
It's
about the
true.
outcome. It's not quite that binary. And I think that's a really important distinction because sometimes you do give your very best effort, and your best effort is a B or a C. It's not,
Hmm.
you don't always get an A. And I love
Yeah.
that reminder to myself that I am getting better.
But I love Marshall's 20 question process. I mean, if he needs to do it because he knows that he's not going to be able to internally motivate himself to do it every day, then I think that's a sign that everyone needs to be doing that as well. And just the benefits that it will have, like you were saying, Scott, over time to change your behavior in meaningful ways. And there's a great part of this chapter that I love just to kind of identify that distinction between feedback and accountability is that you may not enjoy listening to someone who's delivering feedback to you. And similarly, you may not want to talk to someone who's holding you accountable. So another great distinction between the two to make sure that this is part of that virtuous cycle. So and really to hold yourself accountable, beware of backsliding because that happens even after the coaching time, which 6 months, 12 months, whatever that is. Uh, Marry accountability with feedback so that you have both, which I think both is crucial. And the other thing that we didn't touch upon, but just quickly, is broadcast your commitment to hold yourself more accountable. So if you're telling more people, right, more incentive to make that change last.
Right. And it creates more awareness for not just for other people, but for you as well. Because there's several studies that are now saying that up to 90% of what we do every day is not conscious. And so if we become even a little bit more conscious about our goals and how we want to show up,
Hmm.
we do a lot better.
Right. It's also a great example of leadership, right? I mean, Hubert Joly did a great job of this. He's like, my name's Hubert Joly and I need help. CEO of Best Buy, telling the people of Best Buy that he wants to get better and needs help, gives them permission to also be vulnerable and seek to improve.
That authenticity and vulnerability of leaders is so essential for the culture of the organization. So we've looked at this virtual cycle, which starts with the openness to change, receiving and giving feedback the right way, taking action, and holding yourself accountable. And it builds upon itself, like with what Jacquelyn was saying earlier, like a flywheel. That as you go through this process more and more, you get more momentum built, and you become more coachable, and you see more results that are going to positively impact your life as a result. The final piece I just like to, before we end the episode, is just a new way of being in different leadership styles. And I love how you kind of classify these styles as striving, people pleasing, rising, and flourishing. So if you could perhaps just give our listeners a broad overview of each one and which one is the preferred one.
Right. Man, this is our favorite part of the book. In fact,
Yeah.
I think we're really painting a picture for where leadership can go, where our companies can go, the type of environment that's possible for as we become healthy leaders and create healthy organizations around us. So anyway, but to start with striving,
Hmm.
striving is really about someone who is extracting value for themselves. If we think of it as a 2 by 2 grid, there's extractive and then expansive, and then we have me and we perspectives. So this is in the extractive and me column. Someone who is trying to, again, they're just in it for themselves, but they haven't quite figured out how to create value in their organization, create more. Uh, and so, especially like I'll describe myself, early in my career, this was some of my own challenges. Really hadn't quite figured it all out, and but I was very focused on myself first and foremost.
Yeah. So moving from, so the x-axis is from me to we, and the y-axis is extractive to expansive. So moving along the x-axis, so we've gone from the bottom left-hand quadrant to the bottom right-hand quadrant. People pleasing is extracting for somebody else, right? So I'm not
Value
I'm
creator.
not creating value in the system. I'm creating value for somebody else, not myself. It kind of on the surface seems a little bit better because it's not quite as selfish, but it's not creating the kind of growth within the system that we think great leaders should be doing. We don't, we're not going to go into all the reasons why someone's a people pleaser or not, but we just recognize that great leaders are not going to be in the people pleaser category.
Right. Well, I think, again, as someone who also went through that quadrant in my own career, I think it was about giving my own self worth to other people and other people's opinions of me, which is still not about how to be good at my job. Right. It was about giving away my agency. But anyway, and then rising is this
Yeah.
perspective of being expansive, someone who actually really starts to create value for their organization. Think, someone who's become a successful sales leader or a successful people leader and is often moving up through an organization, and they are creating more value for themselves and for other people, but it's really still focused on themselves. They are out there looking for title, looking for authority, looking for some of the benefits that come with that, being seen in a certain way, with a certain power or authority or influence in the world. And that's really most of the leaders I would say that we start to work with in the world of coaching are people who are value creators. So their company sees that they're worth
Mm.
investing in, and yet they tend to be a little more self-focused, which is
But
why coaching is a good intervention for them.
the leaders that we're seeing that we would, I mean, I'd love to call them leaders of today, but probably a little more ambitiously leaders of the future, are the leaders who recognize that by creating more, they're creating more for themselves, but they're really just creating a bigger whole and growing their company. They will do fine. Thinking about their employees and making sure that their employees feel the abundance of the whole company, like everybody wins. And I think in today's world, it's hard to be a great leader and not do that. Because as Jacquelyn was mentioning before, younger generations don't want to work for companies that aren't doing. Now, look, we're talking about elite, elite companies, and the kind of employees that everybody's looking for, the best of the best. But I think that's what companies should aspire to. And it's a little bit more than the leading edge now. I think it's starting to be, very meaningful companies have recognized, and this is what we're seeing in our practice, that leaders have to be looking to be flourishing leaders, be able to have that humility that you were talking about before, to not put themselves first, and to be able to, put their employees, all stakeholders, um, put all those interests in line.
Yeah, and I think it's what we were talking about earlier, the power of relationship, the power of
Hmm.
collaboration, that we can do so much more together. And when a leader shifts their perspective and recognizes that, it really creates flourishing, not only for themselves, but for the people that they're in relationship with. And there was a great study recently by the Institute of Coaching, the IOC, that talks about the ripple effect of coaching. That people who are coached end up having impact two or
Hmm.
three people like beyond them and positively impacting people. And so that shift, when we see that in leaders, is profound, and it makes a really big difference in organizations beyond what most people may even be conscious of.
I love that framework, and I definitely agree with you regarding flourishing creates more benefit for all. If leaders can occupy that space more than some of the others, which are more self-oriented or outward-oriented without the looking at oneself and one's issues. I mean, I know I people pleasing and striving. I kind of go back and forth between in my career, so it's a hard road to balance. To make sure that you really look out for yourself, but more importantly for others, right? And bringing others along with you, so that more people can benefit from the overall experience and from the growth of your company.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think our message, if there were one simple message, it's by looking out for others, you actually serve yourself. Like, especially as a leader, you don't really have to put yourself first.
Great insight. Well, thank you both for joining me today on the program. So appreciated our conversation. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your book and the coaching agency.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much. It has really, I mean, we really enjoyed the conversation with you, Charles. So thank you. The book, we do have a website, becomingcoachable.com. Of course, it's available on Amazon and places where you buy books. The agency is the 100 Coaches Agency. That's 100coachesagency.com. And you can find out more about us and the phenomenal group of people that we're associated with, because of course the agency is our people, and they're just some of the top talent of the world.
Well, and I should also mention that feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. Scott
Oh,
has an
sure.
excellent LinkedIn newsletter that goes out to over 40,000 subscribers every week, and it is always a good one.
If you like this episode, then please share it on social media and consider leaving a review or rating. If there are specific leadership topics or industry leaders you'd like us to feature on the podcast, we are welcome to your suggestions. Remember, knowledge's transformative power is only activated when it is acted upon. So what actions are you going to take on the insights and knowledge shared in this episode?